Not every company needs or can afford a full-time CFO. That's where fractional CFOs come in. High-impact finance leaders who step in just when they're needed most.
Today, we're digging into the rise of the fractional CFO model with Anne Samak de la Cerda, partner at FLG Partners.
We'll compare notes on early and late-stage challenges, unpack how the job has evolved in recent years, and clear up the common confusion about roles and responsibilities, from bookkeeping and accounting to real financial leadership.
If you've ever wondered when to hire a fractional CFO, what they actually do, or whether this could be your next career move, this episode will give you clarity, strategy, and insight straight from the trenches.
Let's dive in.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Growth Minded CFO podcast. I am very happy to be with both Lauren and Anne Samak de la Cerda today on this episode. This is a little bit of a special episode because we have two fractional CFOs on the call today. And I'm sure that Lauren will be very happy to, for once, be a little bit of a guest on this podcast. And I'm super happy to have both of you on the show today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to get a chance in the guest chair and kind of talk about what I do. It's really cool. And I'm so excited to be joined by Anne, who is also a fractional CFO. And we get to talk a little about the diversity of this role, which is wonderful. So Anne, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both. Thank you for having me. I'm excited too.
So maybe if we want to start, Anne, can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you began your role as a fractional CFO, and then we have a myriad of questions to ask you about the position and how you got there.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I've been fractional CFO for 5 years, and overall CFO for 15 or 20 years, I guess. What can I say? I'm based in San Francisco, moved here in the US 10 years ago. I grew up in France. And my journey into fractional CFO was not a planned one, which I'm sure is often the case. It really came out of a crazy pivotal experience. I joined a company called Anki. They were a robotics company, well-funded, Series D or E, I can't remember exactly at the time. And it turns out, the company had a long vacancy of a CFO, and they were running out of cash fast, and my first role was telling them how fast they were running out of cash because it turns out they didn't exactly realize or wanted to, I don't know. But anyways, that was, very intense, learned a lot, fantastic team, by the way, that I work with there. And it really drove for me the notion of you really need to have the right CFO with the right skills at the right time. And serendipity made it that I crossed paths with an FLG partner at that same time, who basically told me, you focus on this. This is going to be an intense experience. Once you're done, come and join us and, move on to the next thing. And that at the time I didn't think I would, but I did.
So in this position, it was a full-time CFO position, and then you move as a fractional CFO. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what was the rationale for you to jump into a fractional CFO position rather than another full-time job or staying with the company? I guess, like, what was the kind of like initial motivation to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess another story. I read a book at the time which was called Designing Your Life. I would recommend it to my younger self if you haven't read it. And basically, the idea there is to do the minimal viable product concept for product development. You apply it to your career. So basically, you just try things fast, right? And again, crazy experience with Enki, very intensive. I got another CEO reaching out to me for a part-time CFO experience. I thought, this is strange. I don't know if I'm a good fit, but I'll try, right? And I think the two of these things of, I saw at Enki what they needed at the time was really someone who, we had to sell the company, do, an asset sale and wind down. And, you can't invent that if you haven't done it before. Combined with the fact that there are all the skills out there that are needed for a smaller size company. And you can actually do both at the same time. That's what decided me to try it. And again, it was really out of that notion of I'm just going to test and try. And I loved it since. And then I decided to join FLG to be more structured in my approach. And we can talk about that. But I'm curious about you, Lauren.
Yeah. It's I always love hearing how people get into this because there's always some like similarities and differences. So my own background, I had worked in startups for quite a long time. That was sort of my most prominent role. I had a brief kind of time as a software engineer early on in my career, really as an administrator. And then I also did a couple of years at Deloitte Consulting as a management consultant. But all other roles had been working with startups in more of like a chief of staff role. And my more recent one before going fractional was really the true CFO role. And I loved this role because as really sort of a native strategist, I discovered like, oh, if I'm looking at the finances every day, like this is where all the answers are. This is like the best dashboard to run a company. And as the CFO, you get to be the expert from that sort of that dashboard informing all of the decisions that the company is making. And in my last W2 role, I left because they were growing for a while and in startup mode, and that was really comfortable. But then they started to stabilize. They got pretty big. We went from when I joined, there were 10 engineers in the company, and we grew to like, I think it was like 150 employees, 26 million in revenue. And the appetite for more really aggressive growth was starting to go down. And so my role was becoming more of a maintenance mode role. And I didn't like that. So I left. I started my own startup, which was in like the housing space, and simultaneously started doing some frac CFO work to kind of pay the bills because housing has really long cash cycles. Well, the housing startup had lots of interest from investors, but no customers. And the fractional was exactly the opposite. There was so much demand for support for a CFO. And I also kind of made this discovery early in the journey where one of the companies I was supporting is a logistics company called Ship Essential here in New York City. I was working very closely with the founder, and I was working, part-time. And his comment at the time was, I know you're working just part-time here, but it feels like you're working more than everybody else in the company. So I kind of had this aha moment of like, oh, this doesn't really take 40 hours to really drive huge impact. This feels like a new thing. Like this feels like the way to do this for a company of this scale. And so I exited my startup, and I did this. I started doing this full time. So yeah, a little bit of like you kind of, and I love that book, the Design Your Life book also, Anne. I read that one. It changed my life too. It is a really great way to apply the learnings from that book of like, just trying it and noticing like, oh, actually, this really, really works with my life. This really works with my personality. And then you just dig in more because it's a good fit.
Yeah.
What I like with Lauren is that every time we do an episode, we learn something new about the life of Lauren, who has lived like a million lives before being a host here on the podcast. So that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that, and thanks for the question. And I'm very happy to learn about Lauren every time. That's really interesting insights about how you got there. And I think one thing that I really liked about your two profiles is that it feels like, and you're more focused on like later stage companies when Lauren is more like early stage. Can you tell us a little more, Anne, about your role in the kind of like more later stage and what you like specifically about that stage? And I would love to hear from Lauren after the kind of different that she sees in the kind of like more early stage.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is, later stage fractional CFO or interim CFO, because a lot of what I do is actually interim CFO. So like Lauren said, I'm almost full time, but I'm on an interim basis. And that's about, deep expertise fast, right? And that's what the founders or the board is looking for. There's often some sort of crisis going on. And I discovered that one of my secret power is keeping calm and bringing order and focus in things when things get complicated or a bit heated. Uh, and that experience that I described earlier was one of them, right? It's not fun to run out of money and have to let go of a lot of employees and all of that. So it's really trying on just human beings as leaders to go through those crises. And I found myself as a good sounding board buddy, I don't know, sparring partner, whatever you can call it to CEOs in those stages. So I think that in early stage, it's all about building the system, managing the runway, putting in place the right metrics, of course, some fundraising, putting some processes and all of that. And later stage, it's going to be depending on context, but it's going to be, usually board facing, and then, financing in all its ways, whether it's debt refinancing, equity financing, sale, M&A, special project, and just interim leadership. So, and one of the key differences as well is I usually come in companies where there is a finance team in place, right? Usually a solid one, or not. They all teams have their weak points, but there's usually a controller, there's a VP of FP&A, there is all the accounting things. There's often also a legal, IT, whatever, wrapped into that. And my role is not to run day-to-day operations, but more help them go through again a transition period. I don't know. Does that resonate with you, Lauren?
Yeah, it speaks to, I think you've touched on a lot of the things that are different from early stage to late stage. And I think in early stage, you're kind of emphasizing different things. So at early stage, I would say you're there, or the time to hire a CFO when you're early stage is you're asking certain questions. As a founder, you're beginning to ask certain questions and you don't know the answer. Questions like, how do I get funding? How do I allocate the funding that I got? What the heck is going on with my money that I have? And then also you'll bump into it like in negotiations of like, what should I be aiming for? Where's kind of like the data behind what I'm trying to get out of my relationships with partners or customers or those sorts of things. So when you bump up into those questions, it's when it's kind of time to start bringing in someone with a CFO skill set. And then as a CFO at that stage, I am focused on a couple different things. One, I'm supporting kind of decision making where there's a ton of uncertainty. And so I'm putting a lot of structure around decisions where there's a lot of lack of data or ambiguous data, and trying to help them make better bets. I'm creating some kind of infrastructure. So Anne's mentioned that she might manage a team that's already there. Oftentimes at my clients, I'm building the team from scratch. I'll be helping them hire either full-timers or contractors to come in and do the financial management processes, whether that's bookkeeping, accounting, controllership, even treasury, like putting that kind of SWAT team in place. And also I'm optimizing for something different, I think, in that team than I might be in a later stage, because in both that team and even like in the software stack that we're picking to manage the finances, we're optimizing for flexibility because everything's going to change. So we have to be able to rebuild it quickly when the company pivots. Yeah. And then finally, there's a huge focus on education at my stage, which I often feel like I'm really lucky to have the startup background that I have, because my passion and my skill set is very much aligned to that piece. I really love educating and teaching and kind of mentoring. So that's a really good fit for this early stage where you're not just kind of building the systems and then stepping away. You are really helping the founder to like build the foundations of financial management that they'll be using to run their company for the rest of their journey as a CEO. And so there's a huge piece of just like one-on-one educating and talking them through and thought partnering and kind of building that skill set as a leader. Those are the things I focus on most.
It seems very different, and I find it super, super interesting. And especially in terms of the starting points, right? What is the starting point to hire someone like Lauren or Anne? And one thing that I wanted to go back to, Anne, which I found super interesting, would you say that you usually being hired when a little bit in a crisis mode, when there is something that is a crisis, or because you alluded to some of these moments earlier, but is this the only moment where someone gets in, or do you also have some kind of like more like transformational projects or specific moments where we need to think about someone like you getting into the business?
Yeah, I mean, crises can take different shapes and forms, right? So some are very obvious,
Running out of cash.
Running out of cash is
That's
one.
a scary crisis.
Or another very recurring one for me is the board has lost trust in the CFO. Because usually I come at later stage, there's already some sort of CFO or VP finance, right? And that's another. So nothing's happened in the business specifically. It's just somehow the existing CFO or VP finance has lost their voice to the board and to some extent to the CEO. And sometimes it's about calibrating, what with the CEO, why has he or she lost their voice to the board? And I'm often brought in also to help evaluate the team in place, right? It's the Series D, you have finance team in place who have been operating for some time, and particularly when you're a first-time CEO, it's hard. You hire someone, they grow in their role, they build that team, and if you're not lucky to have someone experienced like Lauren build that team with all the right skill set, you might end up with a team that's kind of, there's so many ways and roles in finance from accounting to, again, FP&A, that you can kind of overhire in accounting and not have anybody looking at, sales ops and strategic sales finance, or vice versa, and end up with like a shaky accounting ground. And so that's part of what I do. And I've lost your question, Alex. What was your question?
The question was that only is the moment to hire you a moment where there is a crisis, or are there other moments where it makes sense? And actually you answered in the sense of sometimes it's also about kind of like rebuilding this trust, or maybe being used, as you said earlier, as a sounding board, or on, as an external kind of like look and eyes on the business.
Yeah, and I've thought about another example actually where the CFO had left. They had a really solid team in place. It was a SaaS company, and the CEO just had an intuition of, actually don't know what I'm looking for next as the next CFO. So I was brought in, and I usually last, let's call it last, 9 months is a typical, 6 to 1 year, but 9 months is the right middle ground, because by the time, even if my role is just come in and diagnose and then hire a new CFO, which I'm part of that process usually as well, it takes time. So, but anyways, she brought me in just for that, help, assess what do we need next. They were Series B, I think, or C, I can remember, aiming to get it to 100 million ARR, and what am I going to need? That's part of the role.
Yeah, I would totally see that. I think it's being a CEO myself of a company, and when you grow through the stages from 0 to 1, and then 1 to 10, I think one of the constant challenges, speaking from my own experience, is knowing who is the right person and being very conscious that you usually don't have the right way to analyze what is the right type of profile that you need. And I think the interesting look, and I don't know if you agree with that, is the fact that you can under hire, but you can very easily as well over hire
Yep.
for a role that is definitely not what you need at your stage. And
Oh, yeah.
striking, and I think the board is usually trying to make you over hire in some ways, because they want to see you at a much larger stage, and they look at the business from a very high altitude. And I think this is one of the challenges, and having someone that is operational, can really go into your processes to recommend the right person, would probably be super helpful. I don't know if you relate to that in your in those kind of missions, Anne, and then Lauren. I think it would be interesting would be to see like how you see the transitioning from you outside of the business as well at some point.
Yeah, I'm also curious and to know kind of, you've mentioned this dynamic between investors and the leadership. So I'm curious, are you always brought in by leadership? Are you sometimes brought in by the investors? Like, how do you navigate that dynamic as well? I don't want to trample on your question, Alex, but I was immediately curious when Anne started mentioning that dynamic.
Yeah, now I got two questions. Okay.
Yes. Sorry, and thank you.
All right. No, I don't know if I have a hard data on that, but I have been brought by the board. Of course, leadership has to be bought in, kind of thing. But the impulse might have come from the board in the situation I just described. We have a CFO at that portfolio company. I think he's or she's running out of debt or whatever. And by the way, I sometimes find that that person is actually the right person. They're doing a great job. It's just trust has run out, and that's hard to change, by the way. So
still to come on this episode.
When you first start out, you have a little bit of like shine left over from whatever brand you came from. So if you came from a prominent, company that folks respect, you might get a little bit of extra trust from anyone you reach out to from that background. But that quite quickly goes away, and you instead become just the power is just your own personal brand and the relationships you've personally formed with others, independent of that brand.
Hypergrowth era is over. This is the age of profitable, sustainable growth. Remember a few years back when securing investment seemed so easy? Today, not so much. Interest rates are up, valuations are down. Money is scarce, and it doesn't come cheap. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. A grow-at-all-costs mindset simply isn't viable in the current market. Today's top priority for businesses is to optimize the customer experience to maximize lifetime value and retention. Marketing, sales, and success have seen decades of investment in the art of optimizing the customer experience. It's time for finance to catch up, to push for the same level of sophistication as the other disciplines, to ensure the finance touchpoints become positive elements of the customer experience. It's time for financial relationship management. This is your CRM for customer engagement through the finance process. Finance have long been under pressure to collect invoices, but not able to focus on the customers those invoices represent. With FRM by Upflow, you can bring the B2C customer experience to your B2B finance process. We've taken a completely new, customer-centric approach that'll set your business free. In fact, we are so confident that we underwrite the value of FRM difference through our unique money-back guarantee. If Upflow doesn't deliver at least double its cost in savings, you get all your money back, no questions asked. Faster payments, better customer relationships, and fully realized growth potential. It's time your finance function embraced the change.
Enjoying today's episode? Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and tell a friend about the show. Now back to the episode.
One of the questions I had for you, so we talked a little bit about how you get into the business, but then when do you, and I think you alluded to that earlier, but when do you know that your mission is kind of done and it's your time to transition out of the business? Because I think it's interesting at different stages. Sometimes in the early stages for Lauren, it's kind of obvious. Maybe you've set up, you've hired your team, but in your role, maybe at later stage, might be harder.
I love that you asked the question, because for me, that was also an aha moment in becoming a fractional CFO is, when do I have to kind of tell them it's over? because usually what happens is that clients want me to stay. They want me to stay and stay and stay, right? And at some point, you have to tell them, like, no, this is over. Either you hire a full-time CFO and that person comes, and I have to disappear really quickly for that person to be successful, right? Because otherwise, I'm making no one a service. Or whatever, the transaction is over, and same thing. The team has to take over. And if they don't think that the team can take over, then it's something else. But if I think the team is ready to take over, then that's my time to leave. So how do I know? Again, I guess it really depends on the context. But like I said, I think it's really about evaluating what I was brought for. What is next? What is coming next? So for example, for a medical company, we raised a Series C, I think, and because they were earlier in the medical world, the next stage after the raise was really about product development, right? And there wasn't, the infrastructure was already there from finance. So to me, it was clear that once we wrap up, the raise, I could move on. It can be very different in a kind of more kind of software tech company where it's the contrary. Once you get the money, that's when finance needs to get into action, get strategic, right? So it really depends, I guess.
And you usually give them timelines ahead of your mission, and you say, look, this is going to be a 6 to 9 month, and then you define some clear KPIs on what you want to have achieved before you move to the out of the business?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually an iterative process. And again, I'd love to hear Lauren's experience, but part of my role is also helping understand what they don't know. And so, it can be bigger than they had thought in the beginning and take a longer time. So I try to set, expectations. Again, I'd say it's usually the client need to stay longer rather than the contrary. And I try to set expectation also in terms of how much time it will take me. And I'm sure on the earlier stage, some companies think that they need someone full time or half time, and it's really just a few hours per week. So have I answered your question?
Yes, you did. And I'm curious to hear Lauren's position on this, because I think, as you said, it might be very different very early. But for you, typically, Lauren, when you see yourself telling your founder and say, look, I'm very helpful here. I'm only working an hour a week, but it's my time to go. What are the kind of like key points for you to know when it's the right time to leave?
Yeah, I think it's really about, and in the startup world, things move so fast. And there's also a lot of stakeholders who might care about the composition of your team as well. So I'm also lucky in that because I have many clients at once, onboarding or offboarding a single client isn't as big of a transition. And so I'm a little more flexible in that regard. If clients do want to stick around for a while or maintain a relationship, there's a way to do that. What I'll typically see is if a client is taking up more and more time because the need for financial management is really extreme, or they're going through a transition, that tends to be, we need to kind of set expectations around how long that will be, because there's only so much bandwidth to kind of manage that for them. That said, a lot of times when I am working with a client, they'll want to work for years together, but we'll go from, for example, a FRAC CFO offering where I'm helping build their team and set up other infrastructure and, managing resources, and we'll transition into more of an advisory relationship later on, where I'm sitting with an hour with the CEO each week, and we are using that time to look at the numbers together and hash out a plan. And honestly, if they don't have someone they feel is comfortable doing that with, that can continue to be like really useful into the future. So I think less about like needing to abruptly end a relationship with my clients and more about what package within my offering is a good fit for where they're at now.
Yeah. Makes so much sense. On your side, and once you've transitioned out of the business, is this a clear cut and you try to just really let the team run on their own, or do you still maintain a kind of a contact and you stay in touch?
Well, of course, I maintain contact because I'm interested and often I form, friendships. When you go through crisis with CEOs, but no, usually it's a clear cut. It happens. I actually do have one now where I've turned more of an advisor, a coach to the VP Finance in place.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting one. But yeah, I have only bandwidth for like 2-3 clients at a time max, because usually I have one big assignment where I'm, like Lauren said, nobody even think that I could be working on something else. It's quite intense, and so usually it's clear cut.
It's interesting. This is the next question I had for you that I think is interesting for everyone listening to us in terms of getting a sense of what can be in your mind. But how many typical assignments would you have at the same time? So you said between 2 and 4, maybe, Anne? Is where it seems that Lauren has more than this? So would that be between like not more than 5 at a given point in time, right?
Oh no, I never go to 5.
Okay.
4 is
a max.
Is when I've been really bad at quitting a client. So it's usually 2, 3. And yeah.
For you, Ryan, is this much more?
It is a bit more. So I range from about 4 to 8, depending on it just as of one-on-one clients in various cycles do it using different services. And then I also support a number of students, which is more like a one-to-many model on top of that. And I also have some partnerships with brands and software companies that I'll also work to reach founders. So I have a bit of a diversified revenue stream. I started out, and again, I think this also speaks to the difference between when you're working with an agency versus when you're working solo. I had an experience very early on in my fractional journey where a lot of my income came from one single client. And that worked great. I was, making plenty and had a great business, had a great rhythm. But that client hit financial struggles and we needed to cut back. And it really, really impacted my income. And it kind of shook me. And I sort of realized as a solo entrepreneur, I needed to diversify those streams a little bit more, especially in the startup world where things move so fast and budgets are quite constrained. And so in my business, I kind of sacrifice a little bit of the profitability I would get from like extreme focus on like one client for the stability that I get from having like a bunch of things going on at once.
So you are applying probably the strategic advice, the strategic financial advice you were giving to your own customers, to your own company, in terms of diversifying your lines of revenues, which is great. Which is really great. Something that was interested. So you work in a larger organization. You're not on your own, right? That's part of FLG Partners. As part of the group, so I was looking at the team before we started this interview. There's a lot of different people. Do each of you have specific skills or areas that you are interested in? And what is the process for if I, kind of like reach out to FLG Partners tomorrow and say, this is my situation, I would love to have someone helping me. What is the process for you internally to decide on who is going to take that assignment?
Okay, so great question, and I think FLG might be a bit different than others in some ways, because we're all partners, so we don't have staff, and we all operate independently, as in we all have our own practice, but we are all under the umbrella of FLG Partners, and for us, it's really a valuable layer in terms of, it's my sounding board for things that I encounter in my role. I can always go to someone who's seen that, shape of shape of debt or seen that, I don't know, board conflict interest issue, or so it's actually really quite valuable. And so so it's not that deals come to, or clients come to FLG Partner and then someone God kind of distributes it amongst us. It's actually, the vast majority of my assignment come from my own network, our CEO or board referral that come to me and as part of FLG. But we do have some deal flow, we call it, that is common, and the way it works is very simple. We tell that to all the clients. The client chooses. So, if someone would reach out to FLG Partner and just say, I need a fractional CFO, I don't know any of you guys, can you recommend? Then, anybody, any FLG partner can chip in. And if we have interest and we feel like we're a good fit, and then we are in competition against each other, and the client chooses. That's how it works. Very, very simple.
I like that. And to rephrase what you said earlier, I think one of the key aspects that I liked as well, and it talks a lot about the network and the power of the network, is also about saying it's maybe, Anne, and you want to work with Anne because, we have a kind of like a personal connection. But I think ultimately you also rely on the group of professionals next to you in terms of maybe they've seen this other situation. And this is also probably what you are buying in some ways from hiring Anne, is also like a global expertise. And that's something that is really great, because we've talked a lot with other guests on the podcast on the importance of getting outside of your business, getting other points of view, getting this ability to, learn from others and not always trying to find the solutions by yourself. And I think this is what you just said. So I think it's a great take from this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it amazing. I found it amazing because you can see pattern within your own work, because you have different companies going through the same thing. Obvious things are, the SVB collapse, or 2020, everybody looking for PPP loans. It's great to have several clients doing the same thing at the same time, but then you have 20 other partners who are going through this, and then you can meet every morning and say, hey guys, what are you doing? It's just nice. It's a lot of value. Yeah.
Not being on your own.
I would echo the importance of building a super, super strong network if you want to go fractional. I chat with a fair number of CFOs or finance leaders who consider going fractional, and they'll often bring up the question they'll ask is, well, where do you get clients? Like, how do you find your first client? And often my advice to them is, if your network isn't yet strong enough for your personal brand that you know exactly who your first clients will be, you might want to wait a second before being fractional, because you need it for everything. I think before moving into fractional, I was coming from brands that had, a lot of prominence in the industry, really strong networks, lots of resources. And when you go fractional, that all goes away, right? It's just you and your skill set, and you get a little period of time. I often say, this is more of a networking discussion from like how to get work, but it applies both to how to get work and how to support clients in terms of your expertise and being able to ping others. When you first start out, you have a little bit of like shine left over from whatever brand you came from. So if you came from a prominent, company that folks respect, you might get a little bit of extra trust from anyone you reach out to from that background. But that quite quickly goes away, and you instead become just, the power is just your own personal brand and the relationships you personally form with others independent of that brand. And if you do it well and you invest a lot of time and energy and effort into building that strong, it means that you're more likely to get referrals for new work. It also means that when you have a question, you know who to go to ask that question. They're excited to jump on the phone with you and chat through it with you. They're willing to send you resources and helpful stuff to like up-level you. So if you're thinking about going fractional, I would say step one is network, build, grow it, take the time, make the investment, create the foundation.
Thanks so much, Lauren, for this reminder, because I think this has been a common pattern over all episodes about this importance of not only the network, but also the mindset of, keeping an eye out for not necessarily what you're doing on the day-to-day, but also on the outside world with other people, learning from them and the importance of that. Thank you so much for that, Lauren. Lauren, maybe there was one question that we haven't touched upon yet, was maybe the change in the role of the fractional CFOs over the last kind of years or maybe decades. We've seen a lot of ups and downs, the advent of new technologies. How has that changed your role as a fractional CFO?
Yeah, I love this question because I'm really fascinated by this topic. I think there's been this big shift kind of recently that happened with Frac CFOs. I think historically, even before I got into Frac CFO work, it meant something very specific, which was like fractional CFOs were CFOs who had a ton of experience. Most times they had gray hair, and they were coming in as like a strategic advisor to companies. And most of these folks were really experienced, seasoned CFOs. And Frac CFO was kind of like the final evolution of their career, like a way to be a CFO with a little more work-life balance. So when I came into the field, that's kind of how I thought of the role. And I thought like, okay, I'm kind of young to be doing this, but like, I feel like I can do it. And if I'm working with startups, it won't be too retirement. Like it'll be crazy and good and I'll like it. But what I've noticed over the past years is a couple different things happened with the supply and demand on this role. So on the one hand, in like 2021, there was a really frothy startup market, and suddenly the demand for the CFO role really went up. And so CFOs like me were not just getting one job offer, we were getting 4. And if you felt really comfortable with the role, you started being able to just say yes to all of them. So being a fractional CFO became more interesting and exciting. And then in 2022, the market kind of fell out in the startup market, at least. There was a lot less budget. And so the idea of hiring a Frac CFO got a lot more appealing to startups because you can afford someone part-time where you might not have budget for a full-time person. And at the same time, a lot of previous CFOs were getting laid off because there wasn't a lot of budget. And so they were moving into fractional as a way to kind of get work again. And then what also happened at the same time, all this frothiness, a lot of folks in the industry got really aware of the fractional CFO idea getting really popular. And a lot of traditional bookkeeping firms and accounting firms started using the term fractional CFO and saying that they provided fractional CFO services as a way of getting a little bit of an increased price point on their service. And so it also started to make the role title a little confusing in terms of like what you were actually getting when you hired this person. So I think that's kind of the context we're in now, where now the role, it means a diversity of different things. You'll hear a lot of different things when it comes to what a fractional CFO does. But moving into the future, I think what's most interesting is what are we going to demand from fractional CFOs? And I think with all of this new technology coming out, with the advent of AI, I think there's going to be a lot more push on those fractional experts also having that tech expertise of being able to come in and not just serve as like an accounting leader, but also as an expert on how to get these things done with the newest technologies, what programs are good, where can we find efficiency, how can we collaborate with engineers to do the financial management in a better way. So I think there's going to be an increasing need or expectation as a fractional CFO to come in and be really technically competent. So I'm seeing more of that. I'm seeing more of that interest in those skills. And you're at a later stage. I'm curious, is this different? Like, what kinds of new things are you being asked to do? Where do you see this going? How is it evolving in your arena?
Yeah, I definitely seen, with the increase in demand for fractional CFO, a lot of, positioning around like you said, accounting firms saying they do fractional CFO work, which is interesting. And some of them do, right? And some of them don't really. So I wouldn't want to be in a CEO's shoes and trying to figure out who's doing what, because that's it's complicated. And definitely this expectation that you can navigate new tools, AI, and managing also the implication in terms of cybersecurity, and that's definitely board topics that come up more frequently now. And I guess what I would add, because of my background as a fellow European, I do think that the demand for fractional CFO will also grow more significantly so in Europe and Asia. It hasn't been that we've been exploring that. There's still this belief that you can't really be at the board table or as a strategic finance person if you're not an employee. And I expect that to change also, like it has in the US. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting conclusion maybe of this podcast in terms of the maturity of these ecosystems being half in Europe and half in the US. We often see a lot of the different maturity stages between the US and the rest of the world in a lot of ways. For me, the most incredible thing was starting on sales and global, go-to-market strategies in the US being much more advanced. I also see it in finance, in the way people approach the function. I'm not even talking about the nitty-gritty details of the tools and anything more in terms of how do you see this role in such an organization? And you can also see it from, as you mentioned earlier, and from the investors and the investors' expectation. For us, when we went through Series A with an American investor, it was a very different expectation in terms of how the finance function is represented at the board than what we previously had out of Europe. And I think it's testament to what you just said. So I think it's a great conclusion, and I think also a great opportunity for everyone to just also find your own space and, as a financial leader, just anticipating those moves that are kind of like really interesting in the space. But thank you so much for joining us today. It was really, really interesting. I was very happy to interview both of you, Lauren and Anne, as fractional CFOs. And it's been really a great episode. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and experience as a fractional CFO. If you enjoyed that episode, or if you want to kind of help us, please subscribe, please share that episode. Please also reach out to Anne if you're interested about learning more about this role and a position. I think she would be very happy to share that in front of in addition to the podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Growth Minded CFO podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and consider telling a friend or colleague about the show. We'd really appreciate your help in spreading the word. The Growth Minded CFO is brought to you by Upflow. Upflow is a groundbreaking financial relationship management software. Think of it like a CRM for finance. Upflow enables businesses like yours to collect cash faster, build stronger customer relationships, and achieve efficient long-term growth. Join thousands of forward-thinking finance leaders and go from chasing invoices to engaging customers. Find out more at upflow.io.